Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and my name is Paul O'Neill, and I want to welcome everybody on behalf of Kingston's Buried Treasures to tonight's presentation of our monthly lecture series. And tonight is really a very special night, because tonight we are going to talk about, and we're going to honor, a very special Kingstonian. In fact, the only person from Kingston to win the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. Robert Dietz was born and raised here in Kingston. He was a Kingston high school graduate, and his life, like many others of that generation, changed in December of 1941 with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Robert Dietz joined the U.S. Army and fought in the European theater. And on March 29, 1945, he lost his life when working with the 7th Armored Division in keeping open the road to Kirchain, Germany, for the Allied forces. By doing so, and by his acts above and beyond the call of duty, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. He really is an example that heroes do exist. In a time where we think that it is harder and harder to recognize some of the most admirable traits, Robert Dietz is an example that heroes do exist among us, that ordinary people sometimes do extraordinary things. And I think it's a lesson for all of us. And we are very, very fortunate tonight to have as our presenter Daniel Joyce. Daniel, everyone can applaud. Dan, many of you may know him. Dan worked for the post office here in Kingston for many years. He lived in Kingston for 50 years. He now lives in Cairo and came down all the way to be with us tonight. But he really is one of the people that is fighting hard to keep Robert Dietz in the forefront, and he deserves that. He truly deserves that. Dan is one of the people at the forefront of the movement to have the Midtown Post Office named in honor of Robert Dietz, and he has continuously exerted every effort he possibly can to let people know how special Robert Dietz is. And Robert Dietz represents all of our veterans, and that's very important to remember that. While he is so significant and his actions really speak so highly, I think if he was here, he would tell us that he is simply one of many veterans, and it's important for us to appreciate that. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome Dan Joyce here tonight, who will talk to us about Staff Sergeant Robert Dietz.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to preface my talk with a few remarks. Paul O'Neill called me up on the phone a while back and said, would I do this? And the first thing I said to him was, I said, I think there's far better people than me to do this presentation. I'm not a veteran, and I thought Mr. Forte, Joe Forte, or Bill Forte, or somebody else from the veterans groups would be more appropriate to do this. But Paul said no. He said, Dan, we want you to present this. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to stand here and do this. And I hope I do honor to the memory of Staff Sergeant Dietz by this presentation. When I started gathering information to do this, the first thing I said was, well, who was Robert Dietz? We know him as Staff Sergeant Dietz, the Medal of Honor winner, but who was he before he even went into service? So I talked to a few people. One of his, Richard Turk, I got some information off of him, and there's a gentleman in the back of the room, his name is Marvin Cole, who actually grew up with Bob Dietz. He was 5 years younger than Bob, but he has great recollections about Bob Dietz. And he said to me, the first thing Mr. Cole said to me when I talked to him, and this was just this afternoon, said he was a marvelous person, very low key. Bob's father had been gassed in World War I, and it was so hard for him to breathe. He had to sleep out on the porch to get fresh air, and his breathing was so labored, so loud, that Bob actually slept out in the garage. And many times his father, even to walk down the street, had difficulty. And people would get a hold of Bob and say, "Your father is down the street. He's sort of grasping on one of the signs down there." But it was because he couldn't breathe, so Bob had to go down and help him out and get him. Now, to go back to Bob himself, he wasn't a person to get involved in a lot as far as athletics. And Mr. Turk told me that when his mother passed away at 30 years old, he sort of took it upon himself to take care of his sister and to watch over his father. And he had a very special friend. His name was Homer Twilliger. Now, Homer had spina bifida. He was extremely strong from the waist up, but his legs were withered. Now, Mr. Cole related this story to me. He said Bob would put Homer, would go up to his house on Clifton Avenue. Bob lived at Abbey Street. So if you know Abbey Street, where Clifton Avenue is, he would walk over to Clifton Avenue, pick up Homer Twilliger, put Homer on his shoulders, take him to high school, and at the end of the day, would bring him home. And I think as we get along in the story, this just shows what kind of a person Bob Dietz was, that he would do something like that. When Homer was old enough to drive, Bob Dietz liked to tinker with cars. So he took this car that Homer had, and he was able to fix the brakes and the clutch and the gas pedal so Homer could operate everything with his arms, his hands, or even his knees. And Mr. Cole tells the story of them going all the way up to Tannersville to go swimming. And Homer's driving this vehicle down, and they're sitting in the back praying that he's going to be. So that's just, they said many times in the summer they would go over by where Kingston Rhinecliff Bridge is now, and they would swim across the river, and Homer would have the boat and he would row the boat because he was extremely strong with his arms. And then somebody else would get in the boat and they'd have Homer swim back. Now, he only could swim with his arms, but they obviously would assist him to get him back. Another story that Marvin told me, Mr. Cole, he said at night, Bob would come home and he would run all the way from Abbey Street out to where Adams Fairacre Farm is now. That wasn't there. There was nothing out there at the time. And then run back. And this obviously put him into the shape of a boxer, a wrestler. And he said 5 of them could jump on Bob Dietz and he'd throw them off like nothing. That's how strong he was. Now, Bob's father had a combination gas station. They said it was a Shell gas station, and sort of like a burger joint. They called it the White Pig. And it was right over, at that time, there was no underpass. I remember that, and I'm sure a lot of you remember. There was no underpass. And that's right where this place was, the White Pig was. And I guess that had to be knocked down when they did do the underpass, and then he had to move his store over by Hasbrook Avenue by the Central Fire Station. And the tragic thing is, and I had forgotten about that until I talked to Mr. Turk on the phone. When he was like in his 70s, I think, Bob Dietz's father got killed in the store. He was robbed and got killed in that store. So Bob Dietz was just a young man wanting to have fun. Now, in this picture, that's Bob and that's his sister. We're assuming, we're assuming that that's his grandfather that's in that picture. Is that Herman? If somebody would know. Now, this is his picture and from the maroon. And, you know, they always put in a little something in the maroon. And it says, "We admire his quiet determination to accomplish whatever he undertakes to do the best of his ability." Now, doesn't that say something, you know, looking into the future as to what happened? That's pretty apropos there. Now, Mr. Cole, look, that's Bob there, but who is Homer Terwilliger in that picture? That's obviously Bob with his friends. And
It's Homer, Bob Dietz, Paulie Interboat, and last one, I can't tell.
Homer sitting in the car?
Yep.
Okay. So there they are having some fun. And it's not World War II yet, so. But there we go. There's his official picture from the service. Now, to go back to some remarks from Richard Turk, other than what we have from Mr. Cole. Bob's sister was Dorothy Dietz. Now, when the mother passed away, Bob continued to live on Abbey Street with his father, but his sister moved over with an aunt to live on South Manor Avenue. It says here, Robert was tall and athletic with blue eyes and brown hair. He was a very good student, could have excelled in sports, but because practice was after school, Robert had promised his mother on her deathbed to watch after his sister. He decided to forego the sports. Instead, he did bodybuilding at home, and as Mr. Cole was saying, did a lot of running to build himself up, developed a powerful physique. This would serve him well later on. Another story about Homer said, once in order for Homer to enjoy the view, I don't know where this was, he doesn't relate it here. He said Robert carried him to the top of a fire tower. Robert is described today by his sister as having been kind and considerate and never showing off. He was quiet, chose his friends carefully, and if you were his friend, you were his friend forever. Robert graduated from KHS in 1940, listed in the Army March 3rd, 1942, and was assigned to the 7th Armored Division. Now, I have to go off point here a little bit. Again, when I was looking to try to get information, it came to mind, why don't I talk to the city historian? And he's sitting right here in the front row, Mr. Ford. And he was gracious enough to allow me to come to his house. And first he said, well, I don't know if I have anything for you. Well, He had a wealth of information. There's 3 books here sitting on that floor. And there was one lady that did all this. Her name was Anna Norton Diedrich. And from 1940 to 1945, she sat with her grandchildren every day and cut out any articles that she saw in the Kingston Freeman or the Ulster Gazette or any local paper and made up these scrapbooks. And they've all been microfilmed, and they're in these books. There's 3,000 names in there of all men and women who served in World War II. It's a wealth of information. Anybody that has any interest, or you've had any relatives that fought in World War II, if Mr. Ford would allow it, look at these books. It's amazing. Almost every page is filled with somebody that's either been wounded, captured, or in a lot of cases, killed in action. If you're looking at those books, it's amazing to realize how many men from the city of Kingston and environs, Woodstock, Rosendale, Riften, were killed in action. I can't imagine, can't envision how a family getting a knock on the door and there's the Western Union person. And if it was during World War II, you knew that that Western Union person was not bringing you good news. About the best maybe you could hope for is say to yourself, dear God, I hope he's only wounded. But in many cases it was saying he was missing in action or he had been killed. And that happened over and over and over again. And we wouldn't have any of that information if it wasn't for this beautiful lady. I don't know the lady. But maybe some of you knew who it was, Anna Norton Diedrich. So I just wanted to say that. I want to thank Mr. Ford for allowing me the privilege of looking at those books. I found stuff in there about my father, pictures I had never seen of my own father. And he had never told me. I guess he didn't want to talk about it. But his brother Vincent was killed on Okinawa, my uncle. And I had no idea of that because he didn't want to speak to it. So let's get back to Robert Dietz. He graduated from high school, I said 1940, enlisted in the Army March 3rd, 1942, assigned to the 7th Armored Division. His unit shipped out to Europe in June of 1944 and took part in some of the worst fighting through France and Germany. Robert reached the grade of Staff Sergeant, even though along the way he had been demoted once for refusing to follow orders that he knew would unnecessarily expose his men to danger. Robert was first awarded the Bronze Star for heroic action in August of 1944, so he had already been decorated. And later in September, the Purple Heart for injuries he suffered. And Robert's sister, after graduating from Kingston Hospital School of Nursing, also joined the Army. And I understand, I think it was from Richard Turk, because that's how he got a lot of this information. His aunt was very good friends with Richard's sister. She served on a hospital ship in the Pacific, Bob Dietz's sister. So now we come to Kirchain, Germany. This is his Medal of Honor citation. He was squad leader when the task force to which his unit was attached encountered resistance in its advance on Kirchain, Germany. between the town's outlying buildings 300 yards distant. Installed armored column were a minefield and 2 bridges defended by German rocket launching teams and riflemen. From the town itself came heavy small arms fire, moving forward with his men to protect engineers. And there's 2 DVDs. There's a DVD where they're interviewing Vincent Jankowski and a gentleman by the name of Richard Matthews. And Mr. Jankowski said he watched Robert in this action. And he said, I seen him go out on the bridge, and he started picking up the mines off the bridge and throwing them over into the water to clear the way. And we have those DVDs. We found them over at the county clerk's office. This is another one that's just on Robert Dietz, which we hope to incorporate into this DVD. Moving forward with his men to protect engineers while he removed the minefield and demolitions charges to the bridge, Sergeant Dietz came under intense fire. On his own initiative, he advanced alone, scorning the bullets which struck all around him until he was able to kill the bazooka team defending the first bridge. He continued ahead and killed another bazooka team, bayoneted an enemy soldier armed with a Panzerfaust, what we would call a bazooka. Shot 2 Germans when he was knocked to the ground by another blast. He quickly recovered, killed a man who had fired at him, and then jumped into waist-deep water under the second bridge to disconnect a demolition charge. His work was completed, but as he stood up to signal that the route was clear, he was killed by another enemy volley from the left flank. Sergeant Dietz, by his intrepidity and valiant effort on his self-imposed mission, single-handedly opened the road for the capture of Kerchane, and left with his comrades an inspiring example of gallantry in the face of formidable odds. So I go back to when he was carrying Homer Terwilliger around. He picked up Homer Terwilliger and carried him on his shoulders. And just to make a comparison here, I think what he was doing when he jumped up to do this, he was in a way carrying his squad of men on his shoulders. And he knew he could go forward and do this, and he more or less said, stay there, I'll do this. Like he would carry Homer Terwilliger on his shoulders. He took it upon himself to take care of his squad in that way. I'm going to go to remarks on General Hasbrook, but just to paraphrase on his remarks, and talking to Joe Forte, it is said that by his actions, he shortened the war by at least a week. Now, maybe that doesn't sound a week, but thousands of young men were being killed every day. So by shortening it a week, he saved the lives of thousands of men. Because if they couldn't get through that bridge and they were stopped, that whole action would have come to a halt. And General Hasbrook says it better than I could ever say it. So there was thousands of young men who came home that maybe would not have been able to come home, and because of Sergeant Dietz. So they came home, had families, maybe became doctors, engineers, lawyers, teachers, because of him. And that's the way we have to think about it. So let me go to well, this is a little bit more on his citation. Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Company A, 38th Armored Infantry Battalion, 7th Armored Division. entered service at Kingston. A lot of what's in these books, going back to those books again, when a group of men, there might be 12, 14, 20, left to go to service, they would gather at the Central Post Office, the beautiful building that was knocked down. I'm sure there's many in the room remember it. I remember it. I worked there. And then they would march them. They would have a parade. They would march them up to West Shore train station for them to leave, to go to camp down to New Jersey, wherever they were leaving to go. Camp Upton is another one where they might have been sent off to. And in any of the books, I couldn't find where Dietz left, but I'm sure he was one of these groups. When they left, they marched them up. The Girl Scouts always came and had gifts for everybody that was in the group. And they had a little parade. Usually the fire chief or the police chief led the parade up to the West Shore station. And the families would march along behind and then see them off on the train. I'd like to go to some of the remarks of General Hasbrouck. I didn't know who General Hasbrouck was until I started digging into all this. General Hasbrouck was from Kingston also. He went to West Point, graduated in 1917, and he was a captain of artillery in World War I, and became the commanding general of the 7th Armored Division in the fall of 1944. Before that, he was on the staff of Omar Bradley. And the 7th Armored Division was in the thick of it in France, in Belgium, and they were involved in the Battle of the Bulge. And in 1945, General Hasbrouck was awarded the Silver Star for gallantry for personally directing his division operating in Belgium. And they were the linchpin in halting the German drive on Liege and in the Battle of St. Vith. They held out for 6 days to stop the Germans. So let me go to his remarks as far as Dietz. And I hate to be reading, but I'm not going to try to paraphrase. His remarks are such that I need to read exactly what he said. These remarks were made by him when they reinterred Robert Dietz at Wiltwyck Cemetery. When diplomacy and other peaceful means of preventing war fail, then the survival of our country depends upon the personal bravery demonstrated by its men in uniform. Today we are here to do honor to our one whose bravery knew no bounds. I can say this with all confidence since I have personal knowledge of the act which won for Robert Dietz the highest honor within the power of the grateful nation to bestow, Congressional Medal of Honor. On March 29, 1945, the 7th Armored Division, to which Staff Sergeant Dietz belonged, which I was privileged to command, was some 40 miles outside east of the Rhine. It was proceeding with all possible speed under urgent orders to capture the immense Eidersee Dam before the Germans could blow it, flood the Eidersee River Valley, and thus block further progress of the United States First Army to the east. Suddenly, serious opposition developed. German troops freshly arrived from Denmark sought to block our advance on the town of Kachane. It was here that Robert Dietz, on his own initiative and with an unparalleled display of bravery and courage, single-handedly opened the road for his comrades to advance. You are no doubt familiar with what he did on this occasion, how all alone he killed the German defenders' bridges, ripped the demolition charges from those bridges, and then as he signaled the comrades on, he was killed by a volley from enemy troops. The remarkable display of courage so inspired his comrades, and his death angered them, caused them to throw all caution aside. Kachane was promptly overrun, its defenders fleeing before the terrific assault of Bob Dietz's buddies, who then drove on at breakneck speed to seize their objective. The Eidersee Dam intact before nightfall of that day. Briefly, that is the story of how one man facilitated the advance of an entire army. For if there had been any appreciable delay at Kachane, giving the Germans time to destroy the dam, General Hodges' 6th Division would have unnecessarily marked time until the floodwaters subsided. How do we honor and remember Sergeant Dietz and others like him? They are looking to us, the living, to preserve and improve a peacetime America. Now, the words that he's saying are in 1948, but I think they also resound today. They knew the appeasement led to the war. They would have to make America strong, not in military strength alone, although that, of course, is necessary, but by our own solidarity here at home and by the united front we present to a troubled world. How can each one of us do his part? Why? By interesting himself in his country's problems, by freely acknowledging that the enjoyment of freedom also entails sacrifice to preserve that freedom. We must understand that the position of world leadership, which victory has brought us, also entails responsibility for keeping freedom alive in other countries of the Western world. We must accept these responsibilities and the intended sacrifices here at home, and with good grace, we must all work together for a strong America. Actually, all who believe in democracy must realize they are themselves constitute an army, and that their tasks are just as real as any which can be assigned on the battlefield. And then he ended by saying, and now we take leave of this brave soldier, Staff Sergeant Robert H. Dietz, 7th Armored Division, United States Army Medal of Honor. We pay homage as he would have us do to all his fallen comrades. Proudly but sadly, we honor them, and may they always rest in peace. Now, Medal of Honor, we have one up here. Medal of Honor is not given out for just anything. It must be so extraordinary that the circumstances rise to the point of where a Medal of Honor would be given. And I didn't know, but Paul O'Neill related to me, you cannot just have a Medal of Honor. It's not legal to have one unless you've been awarded it or somehow been allowed to keep it in your possession. And in fact, it's a federal crime to try to sell one. Can't buy them, can't sell them. In World War II, there was approximately 16 million people served in World War II, men and women, from December of 1941 until the fall of 45. Out of that 16 million people that served, only 473 Medal of Honors were awarded. shows you the level that you had to attain to get one of these. Take 473 and divide it by 16 million. It's infinitesimal. What's the percentage of that? And in New York State, there was only 37 awarded. Now, it had to be hundreds of thousands of men and women that served for New York State in World War II. And only 37 Medal of Honor winners. So again, just shows you how fantastic that was that he got that award, and he was from the city of Kingston. Now, Bob Dietz's body was brought back here on October 15th, 1948. Now, I didn't see any information as to how they decided to bring his body back and why it took all that time. But obviously, again, looking at those books, there was a lot of bodies being brought home. And they wanted to make sure that it was done in a way that honored these people. I want to read the proclamation of the mayor at that time. The mayor at that time was Oscar V. Newkirk. He went on to be postmaster in Kingston. I remember when I came to work in the post office, he was the postmaster. Mayor Oscar V. Newkirk issued a special proclamation concerning the arrival of the body of Sergeant Dietz. Today requested that all national flags of the United States be displayed at half-staff. On all municipal buildings from 2:25 p.m. Friday until 5 p.m. on Sunday. All citizens also are invited to display their flags at home or at the place of business. Mayor's message also requested a period of silence honoring Sergeant Dietz, during which time all traffic will halt, starting at 6:02 p.m. and ending at 6:04 p.m. on Friday. Now you can imagine, the whole city of Kingston was asked to stop for those 2 minutes. And people stopped their cars, got out of their cars, and I would imagine said a little prayer. I don't know, I'm just surmising. He also asked that all church bells tolled during that 2 minutes of silence. Mayor Newkirk's proclamation read, whereas the President of the United States has seen fit to award posthumously in the name of Congress a Medal of Honor to Sergeant Dietz of this city for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity far and above the call of duty while engaged against an armed enemy of the United States on March 29, 1945. Whereas the Medal of Honor is the highest award which can be bestowed upon a United States citizen, whereas the body of Robert Dietz is to arrive in Kingston at 2:25 October 15, 1948 at the West Shore train station. Now, we said before when he left, he went over to the train station to leave. Well, he came back, but he didn't come back alive. He came back on one of those trains at the West Shore station. He will lie in state at the Municipal Auditorium until 5 p.m. October 17th and invite all citizens to display the flag at their business or at home. And as a matter of respect and appreciation for the city's Medal of Honor winner, all citizens observe a period of silence during which all traffic will halt. And the bells on the churches will toll. Now that's Robert Hasbrook there, Major General Robert Hasbrook. And I understand there's a presentation here in October on General Hasbrook. Now, I don't know who.
Jim Harbeck.
Jim Harbeck? Oh, thank you. We didn't know who that was. We knew it was a buddy of his, but we didn't know. Now, again, that's his sister. And is that Jim Harbeck again?
Yes.
Okay. He's with his sister by Kingston Hospital. The steps going up by, it's between the hospital and the nurse, where the nurses, there he is, someplace over in Europe. Again there. And that was his obituary in the paper. And again, there was hundreds of those in those books. But of course, was special. Can you read that from there? That's the plans for when he was going to be brought home. Now, Mr. Forte said they put him on a weapons carrier at the West Shore Station, and there they are coming down Broadway, and they were led by the Port Union Drum and Bugle Corps, it says. And there's a 40-man unit from West Point behind there, and then the weapons carrier with his body on it. And again, reading from the accounts in the paper, everything just stopped. People just stopped their cars, got out, and to pay honor. There's another picture. Sergeant Dietz comes home. Shows the honor guard escorting the body of Kingston's Medal of Honor winner down Broadway from the West Shore Station to the auditorium, October 16, 1948, more than 3 years after he was killed. There they are taking the body into the municipal auditorium. And then he laid in state till Sunday afternoon. And they had a continuous honor guard of different veterans groups protecting him, honoring him until that Sunday afternoon. And from the accounts that I've been able to read, it was about 1,500 people showed up for the ceremonies that went on that afternoon. I don't want to overstep my time. We have Dietz Stadium. That was originally just the Kingston Municipal Stadium. But there was a proposal put forth. This was back in 1953. The Kingston Board of Education has suggested that Kingston Stadium be named the Dietz Stadium in memory of the late Staff Sergeant Robert H. Dietz. His bravery in action won for him the Congressional Medal of Honor. The educators made the suggestion by unanimous vote at their January 8th meeting, and it was forwarded in a letter to Mayor Oscar V. Newkirk. He relayed the letter to the Kingston Common Council that night. The letter signed by Superintendent of Schools Arthur J. Laidlaw, who was the clerk of the Board of Education, stated that the board decided that the field house, now under construction, would be named the Kate Walton Field House in memory of Miss Kate Walton, and that the stadium would be named for Dietz. There has been some agitation that some recognition be given to Staff Sergeant Dietz, who on account of bravery and action was awarded a Congressional Medal of Honor. The letter stated and added that the board is suggesting that the city authorize to give some consideration to memorializing Sergeant Dietz's achievement by naming the municipal stadium. And I understand that I think it was the next year on Memorial Day that they actually dedicated the stadium and made it a Dietz Stadium. And then we also had the Army Reserve Center on Flatbush Avenue was named for Robert Dietz. Now, when that was moved up to Saugerties, the name didn't go up to Saugerties. Now it's been renamed for Dietz, for Sergeant Dietz, and it is the training center for the police that patrol the reservoirs for the DEP. Now it's in the works, and I don't know if, Bill, have you heard anything more?
It's gone all through Congress and been rubber stamped, and then they had the midterm elections, and they had to start all over again.
Bill Forte is with the Kingston Veterans Groups, and they, along with other people, have asked through Congressman Gibson that the Central Post Office be named the Robert H. Dietz Post Office. Like Mr. Forte said it, every congressman in the state that represents the state of New York signed off on this. And I didn't realize it has to go through the Senate too, Bill, and it has to be signed by the president.
I believe that's
So it's a long process. And I think we all said we wanted to do this, so Sergeant Dietz is not forgotten, and especially for the young people. I think that's what we really want to, in part, is it's for the young people to realize his sacrifice and the sacrifice of everyone who gave their lives, the greatest generation, World War II. And they came home and they picked up their lives and went on and did great things. And they didn't want to talk about it. Most of them didn't want to talk about it. Going back to Mr. Cole, and I hope I'm not embarrassing you, sir, but he said he was out in the Pacific at the time in World War II, and he got word that Sergeant Dietz had been killed. And he said he cried because Bob Dietz was such a fantastic individual. Even before he went away, he was a fantastic individual. So, what can we do to honor Sergeant Dietz and the other individuals that gave their lives? Well, as General Hasbrook said, we can take an interest in our communities. And it doesn't have to be extraordinary things. The simple thing is going out and vote. If you have no other reason to go and vote, vote for Sergeant Dietz and all the other ones that got killed to preserve our freedoms and our liberties. And let it not be said that this generation or any future generation allowed freedoms and liberties that he and others died for to be in any way restricted or taken away. So that's what we can do. Mr. O'Neill is Commissioner of Jurors. So it could be something simple as serving as a member of a jury. That's part of our democracy, that we are judged by our peers on a jury. So it could be something as simple as that, or just taking part in Little League, or as a coach, or anything like that where you're taking an interest in the community to honor these veterans, including Sergeant Dietz. And I can go on, but I think I hope that my remarks have honored Sergeant Dietz and his memory. And I would hope that every year around the time of his death, March 29th, that something like this would be presented in the school, especially the high school, to let the young people know what happened in World War II, what his deeds were, and the deeds of other men that lost their lives at that time. And I would hope that that would be done, or at the very least, the city of Kingston every year at the time of his death. You would think there would be a proclamation coming, no matter who's in office, that they would do something, either the mayor or the common council would honor his memory on the day of his death or thereabouts around that time. And I thank you, and I hope I did a good job.
Dan, thank you so much. You did do a wonderful job, and it is important to keep the memory alive of all of our veterans, but particularly someone like Robert Dietz. And Dan's absolutely right that jury duty is something you should do. If you get a jury summons, don't call and yell at me. Just come on in. Believe it. Do it for Robert Dietz if you're not going to do it for me. It is so important, and we do have a special treat tonight. When Robert Dietz's body, that's all right. When Robert Dietz's body was brought back to Kingston, a funeral was held. And at that funeral, Joe Forte played taps for the burial. Joe Forte is here tonight, and he has his bugle. And I would ask Joe Forte if he could come on up, and if he would play taps for us today, as he did for Robert Dietz. Joe, we thank you. And if you would, there is a story, an interesting story about how Joe came to do this.
When I was in high school, they recruited me to play taps at funerals. The American Legion used to have the firing squad at that time. And a lot of us from the high school used to go down to the American Legion at noontime to eat lunch. Bob, before he went overseas, was at the Legion. And he got recruited to go out with a firing squad. There was a retired city policeman who had been a World War I veteran. It was his funeral. We did the funeral, and after the funeral, over here on Fair Street, there used to be an Elks Club. we went there after the funeral, and they had some sandwiches and some alcoholic beverages. After that was over, the police were going to bring me back to school. So Bob Dietz bumped a ride with us. He wanted to drop off at his father's gas station. One of the policemen says to me, "I don't think you better go back to school." Well, anyway, they dropped me off at the gas station there, and Bob says to his father, "Hey, I like the way this guy plays. When I kick off, he can play for me." Okay. Bob got killed on the 29th of March, 1945. I had turned 16 on the 26th of March, 1945. I wanted to go into service. I tried to go by the recruiting station, which used to be in the post office up on the top floor. I couldn't lie my way past them. So I was giving up, and as I'm leaving, in the basement was the draft board. And I got a bright idea. I went into the draft board and I said, "What do you got to do when you're 18? When are you going to be 18? I said, "Next week." "Oh, here, fill these out." Well, I ended up getting a draft card, showed I was 1A. I took that draft card, went down to Whitehall Street in New York City and used that for proof of age, and enlisted. I went in the Army Air Corps and I was a gunner. They found out I was underage, they kicked me out. I went back in and I ended up with the band at West Point. And when Bob was bringing his body home, as a matter of fact, his body was at West Point for a couple of days. They were waiting for Dorothy to come in from the West Coast. And when she got in, they made all the funeral arrangements. But I wanted to attend the funeral. And as you heard said, it was on a Sunday. It's very unusual for a funeral to be held on Sundays. The last minute, I'm told I got to play a funeral Sunday. I went into my CO and I said, "Hey, I want to go there. I knew this family that." He said, "You have been requested by name." And I said, "Yeah, but we got a lot of other guys to do this." He said, "No, you're going to do it." And I'm begging him to let me off. And he finally comes out with, "Well, this man was a Medal of Honor winner." And I said, "Wait a minute," like that. And I realized we're talking about the same funeral. And Dan there asked me if I was with the weapons carrier or not when we went to the cemetery. I had attended the services, and I was in the cemetery when they brought the body there. But I can remember, like he said about Dorothy, lived on Manor Avenue. Well, Bob went to number 5 school. I went to number 6. Dorothy went to number 6. Dorothy was probably 3 years older than I am. But she went to number 6, and that's where I got to know her. But the family, is unbelievable what they've done. Herman had all to do to breathe. And he got his lungs with the gas in World War I, and it was actually pathetic. And then have some kid beat him to death, trying to get something out of him. I've said too much already. I'm starting to choke up.
You haven't, Joe, and thank you very much. And it is a shame.
Here's a photograph here of Herman Dietz. They're placing the Medal of Honor on him. And the date on that up in the corner says December 25th, 1945. The date of the Medal of Honor award was December 17th. So like within a week, they brought him down to Governor's Island in New York City, Herman Dietz. And there's being placed, the Medal of Honor being placed on
the right is Helen Terwilliger, Homer Terwilliger's mother.
Okay, so the one on the right here is Helen Terwilliger, who is Homer Terwilliger, Robert Dietz's friend's mother. This is Robert Dietz's father. And this?
That's the general, I don't know who it is.
Yeah. And anyone?
That's Mrs. Craig.
And that's Mrs. Craig.
Mrs. Craig was Herman's sister-in-law.
Okay.
She actually raised Dorothy.
Okay, so this is Robert Dietz's, I guess, aunt. Yeah.
No, that's not General Hunter.
No. That's Robert Dietz's aunt. After Robert Dietz's mother passed away, his sister went to live with his aunt. He lived with his father. But that's one of the things that makes this so special. The Medal of Honor is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. If you recall from our presentation on General Sherman Hasbrouck, who was a cousin of Robert Hasbrouck, the commander of Robert Dietz, and he is the West Point historian, he said about the Medal of Honor, he said, I would give anything except for my kids for the Medal of Honor, even his wife. And he made a point to say his wife, so she wasn't here. Again, we said we're not going to say that, but it's absolutely amazing. Not only does the feats that you perform are above and beyond the call of duty, somebody has to see that. There must be witnesses. The witnesses must survive. You know, many times the people who win the Medal of Honor are killed doing it, as in this case. That's why it's so special. And one of the things I think you find time and time again when you do talk to surviving Medal of Honor winners, or you hear about the Medal of Honor winners such as Robert Dietz, is that they're quiet, solid, decent people. And they seem often almost embarrassed by the honor that's given them. And they will always say that they're just representing everybody else in the military, that they don't deserve this special recognition. In fact, there's many times when people will pass away and family members, friends, find out after they pass away that they had actually won the Medal of Honor. It's actually the Medal of Honor, not the Congressional Medal of Honor. And that you hear it always as congressional, but it is or isn't?
It was changed.
The Congressional Medal of Honor?
So often, all the Congressional Medal of Honor, I guess they threw the towel in and said, okay, it's a
Okay.
Congressional Medal of Honor.
So it wasn't.
You were right.
So it's always been said the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is actually kind of strange because it's usually awarded by the president. You often see the president giving it, but I guess it is now the Congressional Medal of Honor. And we have an actual Medal of Honor here tonight. And I would tell everybody, it's up here in the display case. Before you leave, come take a look at it. I don't know that you're ever going to have another opportunity in your life where you're going to see an actual Medal of Honor. And we thank Bill Forte for that. Bill Forte.
If I could say, you brought up earlier, the only way you're allowed to have one of these things is if you were a recipient, family member of a recipient, it was passed on, or it was given to you by a recipient. I received that many years ago. I was collecting medals when I was a little boy, and the man that had this down at West Point knew I was interested, and one day he told me he's going to be leaving soon, and he asked me to have my father stop by and see him, and that's how I came by it. This is the first time I've ever put it on display. I had to go over to my safe deposit box earlier this week. It's been in there for 15 years. It's been 15 years since I've seen it. And after Mr. Joyce's presentation and all I've learned about Bob Dietz, I'm going to give some serious thought as to where this thing is going to go. I don't want anybody to ever think that it was mine.
It is, again, as Dan said, you can't just get a Medal of Honor. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can only get it by winning. It has to be awarded to you, or you have to get it from somebody who had been awarded to, or someone that they've given it to. It's an incredibly special thing. It's an incredibly special thing, and we have somebody here in Kingston who won this incredible honor, and that's what makes it so special tonight. Is that so many people here knew Robert Dietz.
Does anyone know where his medal is, Robert Dietz medal?
I was speaking to his sister Dorothy's husband. She just passed away about 2 years ago, I believe. And about last year I was speaking to him, and the medal went to a nephew, I believe, up around Rochester. I don't know how to contact him, didn't find out his name, but I was speaking to him on the phone, and he said the nephew had it.
That would be Dorothy's son.
I assume, yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
In fact, I saw Dorothy had moved to Florida, and she passed away a few years ago. I saw her obituary, and most of her obituary was about Robert Dietz, about her brother. She was so proud of him, as we all are, that her obituary was almost entirely about Robert Dietz and what he did. And it's amazing. And as Dan said, especially for the kids today, what kids are looking up to the Kardashians. Robert Dietz was not much older than the kids in high school today. How much better if their role model would be someone like Robert Dietz instead of some of the people that they look forward to today?
Hi, I wish to make a comment, not a question. Back in the 70s and 80s, when I worked at IBM, a bunch of us fellas went to the Y to work off the day's stress and everything from IBM. And one of our favorite jogs or runs was going down Pine Tree Avenue, I believe, into the Wiltwick Cemetery, and we would run laps around the cemetery. And most of us, when we went by this headstone, we didn't know who he was or his story or anything like that. Behind it, we just bow our head and would go on. And I want to thank you for telling me the rest of his story, because I never realized, you know, what went on, where he was killed or anything like that. So thank you very much. It's meaningful to me. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I hate to be hogging a microphone, but another item comes to mind. Every year, the Kingston Veterans Association, 1 week prior to Memorial Day, we hold a brief service at his grave. We put a fresh wreath there, put a new flag out, and we do so many functions related to Memorial Day that we had to start a week before. So we start on the Sunday before Memorial Day, and it's open to the public. We generally try to get something put in the paper about it, and be nice to see more people show up for it.
It certainly would be, and it's important.
You did a great job, Daniel. It was
Oh, thank you.
really thank you for what you've done, keeping Robert Dietz's memory alive. I had the opportunity to interview the last two living members that were with him the day he was killed, and it was quite an honor to hear these guys speak about Robert. And as you see in the interview, one of the stories that Vince Jankowski had mentioned is that he was one of the replacement soldiers, these two guys, Harold Matthews and Vince Jankowski, and they were brought into the company, and this had to be around probably December '44, and one of the officers, a sergeant, whatever, was really brash and harsh and said, "Here, this is where you go, and this is what you do, and this is where you're going to be," and all this stuff. And of course, you know, he took it in stride, and he says, and this gentleman came over to me, and he says, "That's no way to treat a new recruit, you know." And he says, "Let me show you what you got to do," and he pointed out some things, the do's and don'ts, and it was Robert Dietz. You know, it lives right up to the story you're talking about. He was quite a gentleman all the way through. Took care of people. Vince had told me that he didn't know anything about the Medal of Honor that Robert Dietz had been awarded until like 50 years later. He told me that he opened up the magazine of the 7th Armored Division ready for, you know, the reunion coming up. And he had just gotten back in contact with some of the reunion. And he opened up and realized he got the Medal of Honor, and he said when he saw that, he just sat there and cried and cried. He says, "I couldn't believe they actually finally gave it to him." He says he deserved it, and I never knew about it. I'll tell you one little story. When in 2006, I brought Vince to Kingston to talk about the story, and his his relationship with Robert. And we had 13 World War II veterans come up here, and we did a little parade down Broadway, and we had them up here at City Hall. And we had them lined up, and we had about a 16-man color guard. It was beautiful. It was awesome. We even had a Black Hawk flyover. And Mayor Sataya was out there, and actually Vince came in and down the road in the vehicle that Robert Dietz always rode in combat. So it was pretty unique, and Vince was so excited that he was able to do that. And as we were getting ready to do the Star Spangled Banner and open it up, and before, you know, when they did all that, they did the 21-gun salute, and that was done virtually almost simultaneously as the helicopter flew over, and this was during school hour. So as that all went off, the helicopter flying over and the guns going off, everybody in the high school across the street thought they were getting attacked. So.
Thank you. And Judge Christopher Cahill, who's one of our exceptional Supreme Court judges over in the courthouse, had told me yesterday that his father went to school with Robert Dietz, and he said that the stories that his father had always told him really impressed on the fact of what a wonderful, decent person he was. That he was always just such a wonderful guy, just very down to earth. You could always rely on him, and that seems to be what comes across. Everybody who knew him always says the same thing: very low key, very quiet, but did incredible things. And as I said in the beginning, you know, ordinary people can do extraordinary things, and it gives us faith that we can all do that. And he really, not only does he represent everyone in the military, all of our veterans, but he represents all of us. And it's very special that we get to honor him tonight. And Dan, again, I thank you so much for that.
Can we go back one?
We have another comment.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
The armored infantry was one of the most dangerous outfits that you could be in World War II. I served as a replacement infantryman in the 38th Infantry, and we were assigned to go down to Czechoslovakia to help one of the armored divisions that was there to clear all of the last part of this resistance that they expected in the Sudetenland. It turned out it didn't end up being very much of a resistance, but we did ride in trucks, and we did ride on tanks going into Pilsen to liberate Pilsen. And the other thing I wanted to make was I saw not one single general when I was in combat in World War II. The highest ranking officer that I saw was a lieutenant colonel who was a regimental commander. The captains were company commanders, and the staff sergeants and the tech sergeants were absolutely the life of the infantry as it was made up. And you can't say enough for the heroism for that staff sergeant, because he did save lives. I was one of them. And my regiment lost 161 men per day from D-Day to when we had the celebration of World War II, the end of World War II. So these names that are on that plaque there in the courtroom in front of the county office building, they represent families, and you should always remember that every single one of those names was attached to a family. And they all had dreams, like we all have dreams, and they just didn't come because they gave their lives. And you should remember it almost every day of your life, that the only reason we're here is because they did those things. Okay?
Thank you, Bill.
I'll make this quick because I'm sure we're all going to get out of here. One of my hobbies is buying postage stamps that has artwork that after the stamps are gone, I can use to put on other envelopes. I don't know how many of you know this, but the Postal Service has issued about a month ago, I think 2 or 3 sets of Medal of Honor stamps honoring all the Medal of Honors winners from Korea, I think Vietnam, and World War II. And what I do is I not only put the stamp on, but they have the photographs of the winners. Not Dietz, but they have photographs. So I cut those out and I put those on with the stamp.
Alan, thank you. Thank you, because I was not aware of that. So, again, we thank all of you for your comments. You can't say it too many times that these are the people who have given us what we have. We enjoy the freedoms from their sacrifice, particularly people like Robert Dietz. So it's wonderful to be able to honor them. Robert Dietz is buried in Wiltwick Cemetery today. You can go and see his grave. It has a portion of President Truman's recitation of the awarding of the honor, and it's very moving. It's very moving, and as you can see, has flag and flowers there, and we thank Bill Forte for that. So we thank all of you for sharing the stories, and Dan, we thank you again for doing this. This is very appropriate that we would honor Robert Dietz tonight. So. And again, we do want to thank all the people who make the event possible. What we are going to actually do, Bob Rizzo records all of the presentations, and one of the videos, Bob Rizzo is the one who actually made the videos, and there were reunions of a lot of the World War II groups. And on some of them, they talked about Robert Dietz. So one of them, there's a 7-minute stretch that is going to be added on to the DVD. If you want to buy tonight's presentation from the DVD of this talk, Bob is going to add that DVD on as well. So we thank all the people who make this possible. I do want to say that the Friends of the Senate House are having an event on September 11th. Jay Unger and Molly Mason, I'm sure most people have heard of them. If you have not, and if you've seen the Civil War series by Ken Burns, the music in that is Jay Unger and Molly Mason, and it really was a huge part of the success of that series. They're absolutely wonderful. They're going to be playing September 11th here on the grounds, 6 to 10 p.m. Effie Tretoris is standing in the back. She is the president of the Friends of the Senate House, and she has tickets if anybody wants to go. The tickets are $30 a piece. So we hope that you'll join us in the Senate House. And I do want to tell everybody about our upcoming events. Next month, Nancy Shando is here tonight, is going to talk about the DAR house. If you're not aware of where that house is, that's that house on that pie-shaped corner at Green Street and Crown. We're actually going to have the talk at the DAR house. So if you haven't been in there, it's an absolute beautiful building, one of the earliest here in Kingston. You can go inside. It's currently the Daughters of the American Revolution house, and Nancy Shando is a member there. She's going to tell us all about its history. And then in October, again, General Robert Hasbrouck, the hero of the Battle of the Bulge, is going to be our subject, and the presenter is his son, Robert Hasbrouck Jr. And it's funny, when I spoke to Robert Hasbrouck Jr., and I spoke to him when we were doing the presentation on Sherman Hasbrouck, the first thing he told me about his father, he said, you know, my dad was the commanding officer of Robert Dietz. That was the first thing he said. He really is one of the heroes of the Battle of the Bulge, and he was also the one who came up with the idea of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So an incredible individual, but even Robert Hasbrouck, one of the things he was most proud of was his relationship and the fact that he was a commanding officer to Robert Dietz. So again, Dan, we thank you so much. We thank all of you. I want to thank Joe Forte and Bill Forte for really making this very special. And as I will tell you, there's an actual Medal of Honor up here. It's on display. We encourage you to come on up and take a look. So thank you, and we'll see you next month.
On the 21st day of September 1945, Staff Sergeant Robert H. Dietz was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity involving risk of life above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy at Kirchhain, Germany on 29th of March, 1945. The medal was presented to Sergeant Dietz's father, Herman O. Dietz, at a formal military ceremony on Governor's Island on December 14, 1945. At the time, President Truman referred to Robert Dietz as a one-man army. Omar Bradley, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, wrote of his personal admiration for Robert Dietz's heroic achievements. While the nation recognized him for his acts of valor, the city of Kingston, New York, mourned the loss of one of their sons. Robert Dietz was born in 1921 and grew up in the family house at 37 Abbey Street in Kingston. He attended Public School No. 5, later called the Frank L. Meager Elementary School, and in 1940 graduated from Kingston High School. As a young man, he would often help his father at his gas station adjoining the Broadway Railroad crossing. In the 1940 Maroon, the Kingston High School yearbook, the inscription next to Robert Dietz's photograph reads, "We admire his quiet determination to accomplish whatever he undertakes to the best of his ability." These same qualities would help Bob Dietz when he became part of the U.S. military. Like many others in Kingston, Bob Dietz enlisted on March 22, 1942, to help do his part to serve our great country. His sister Dorothy also volunteered to do her part by enlisting in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps. 3 years and 1 week after enlisting, Robert Dietz was killed in action while committing acts which would later earn him the Medal of Honor. Even before Kirchhain, Bob Dietz had been recognized for actions during live combat. On August 23, 1944, he had been awarded the Bronze Star Medal for heroic achievements while with an armored infantry battalion on the German front. At that time, he braved the rain of enemy fire coming from an island on the Seine River, near Melun, France, as troops were crossing the river. He was one of the first to reach the island and immediately attempted to silence a machine gun pouring fire into our troops, and did his utmost to administer first aid to a wounded soldier of his company. On September 19, 1944, he was awarded the Purple Heart after being wounded in the neck during an Allied assault on Metz, Germany. The Battle of the Bulge was winding down. Harold Matthews and Vincent Jankowski were assigned to Dietz's 12-man squad. Vincent Jankowski was with Sergeant Dietz on a clear, warm spring day near the end of the war. At about 9 a.m., elements of the 38th Infantry Battalion, spearheading the 7th Armored Division, approached the farm town of Kirchhain, which could be seen across a small stream spanned by a stone bridge. Jankowski was aboard the 3rd Sherman tank in a line when a German soldier stood up near the entrance of the bridge and fired a bazooka at the lead tank. We all scrambled off the tanks and dove for cover alongside the road. Then I saw Bob Dietz running along the road firing into foxholes. There were quite a few anti-tank mines on the bridge. He was dashing around, grabbing the mines, and throwing them off the bridge and into the water. These courageous acts of Sergeant Dietz were detailed on his citation for the Medal of Honor as follows. Sergeant Dietz was a squad leader with Company A, 38th Armored Infantry Battalion on 29 March 1945, when the task force to which his unit was attached encountered resistance in its advance on Kirchhain, Germany. Between the town's outlying buildings 300 yards distant and the stalled armored column were a minefield and 2 bridges defended by German rocket-launching teams and riflemen. From the town itself came heavy small arms fire. Moving forward with his men to protect engineers while they removed the minefield and the demolition charges attached to the bridges, Sergeant Dietz came under intense fire. On his own initiative, he advanced alone, scorning the bullets which struck all about him until he was able to kill the bazooka team defending the first bridge. He continued ahead and killed another bazooka team. bayoneted an enemy soldier armed with a Panzerfaust, and shot 2 more Germans when he was knocked to the ground by the blast of another Panzerfaust. He quickly recovered, killed the man who had fired at him, and then jumped into waist-deep water under the second bridge to disconnect the demolition charges. His work was completed, but as he stood up to signal that the route was clear, he was killed by an enemy volley from the left flank. Sergeant Dietz, by his intrepidity and valiant effort on his self-imposed mission, single-handedly opened the road for the capture of Kirchain and left with his comrades an inspiring example of gallantry in the face of formidable odds. Harry S. Truman. The city of Kingston would mourn Bob Dietz's death when it was first reported, and again on October 15, 1948, when his body was returned home accompanied by a 40-man honor guard from West Point. The preamble of the Medal of Honor Society reads, Medal of Honor recipients are made of stuff which alone can turn a battle and bring a nation immeasurably closer to victory. The debt of gratitude due to them is endless. The deed must be so outstanding that it clearly distinguishes the nominee's gallantry as above and beyond the call of duty. As Harry Truman had stated on his citation for the Medal of Honor, Sergeant Dietz left with his comrades an inspiring example of gallantry in the face of formidable odds.